Welcome everyone to our third public conversation that we're having on for this wonderful exhibition, Common Ground. As we've said before, this is a group exhibition. In many ways, the art itself is a conversation, but today we really get to spend some wonderful quality time with 6 of the artists addressing their art making practice in changing times. We're trying out this webinar format, so I am encouraging everyone to be patient, but also give feedback. We welcome both. This allows you to see and keep, if you are set in gallery view, you'll be able to see everyone on the screen together. And then we will make sure you open up chat, and it's a good place to put your own comments or questions. We'll do the questions after they've done their conversation and presenting their images. So without further ado, but pausing a really important practice that we are bringing to these conversations, guided by 2 of our Indigenous artists that have been with us on other panels but aren't here today. So before we begin, we have gathered on the traditional lands of the Chumash and Tongvan peoples, on which many in our community live and work. We want to acknowledge their history and continuing presence in our communities, and our commitment to follow their leadership in protecting the sacred earth that we all share. And now, Suvan.
Okay. I just want to welcome everybody who's joined us for this conversation. I'm really pleased with this exhibition, and I'm delighted with this panel in particular. Just a reminder about what Common Ground is about. Common Ground is about what we have in common. It's what we share. We all have in common the ground we stand on. And making the earth and the future that we all share part of our discussions about art and our lives might just help us mend some of the other broken connections that have put us on this collision course with our own future. Because this is a really contested, unbalanced feeling time. The works in Common Ground cross many categories. There's social, political, social practice, collaborative, environmental issues. They all share the same gallery. This panel, all the panels, offer a chance for us artists, which I'm really excited about, to talk to each other beyond that sort of opening night pleasantry, gee, I love your work kind of thing. We're using the Zoom panels for a gallery show in the middle of a pandemic lockdown as a small step in what we hope can begin sort of breaking aside of our modern habit of considering nature over here and humanity over there like they're 2 separate things, like they don't share the same air they breathe, okay? So I'm gonna go right now to my first slide to talk a little bit about this panel, and hopefully it all goes well. There we go, there, okay. This is the Making Art in an Unbalanced World panel. There's wonderful work in this exhibit, and we're going to get a chance to look at some of it right now, because at least one of each slide, of each artist's slide, is the piece or pieces that are in the show. And they've also given me a couple more, and they will each have time to talk about their work. So we'll get to a little bit more background and familiarity. Just know that everybody on this panel deals with movement and change. 2 things that make us feel like we've lost our sense of place, or sense of stability. In their 3 minutes, they will talk about their work. At the end of that, we're going to have a conversation. Now, we're going to talk to some of the questions that Danelle and Sinan and I sort of conversed with Sandra and came up with as we were pulling this whole thing together. And just want you to know that you're invited into this conversation, but you're on chat. So if, as we're talking, questions arise for you, please put them in the chat box, chat room. Now, when we're all done with all of our conversation, at the last 15 minutes approximately, what we're going to do is we're going to go to, we're going to let Sandra basically tell us what's in there, and she will read some of these questions that the panelists will then respond to, okay? So that's how it's going to work. It's sort of a, I don't know, it's not a straight line. That's all I can say. And I will go now to the first slide, and that'll be Sharon. Here we go. You're on.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and I thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this show. I'm an artist who works at both the personal and the collective level. I consider the duality of being Black and an American. Of course, at the macro level, I am a global citizen, which I also acknowledge deeply, and a Black female. My work employs process and materials through the medium of social abstraction and poetic materiality that addresses race, culture, society, memory. And as I think about change, I think about the quote from Octavia Butler: all that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. So this is present in my work all the time because I'm layering, altering, stripping away, adding to, fashioning around these concepts of race, culture, society, and ancestral memory. And the process itself is full of change because I take a material and alter it. They could be found materials that I find through a number of sources, and as well as traditional art materials. But they're stripping away, adding to, layering on, weaving into, and then rebuilding into something with a new reality. So my work speaks to change all the time. These images that you're seeing are bodies of work from both painting and sculpture, because I work both 2 and 3 dimensions. And I also name my work off of poetics. Like this one, shadows cut from shade, is a quote from Langston Hughes. So I'm infusing a lot into my work.
These are times, so every screen is for 1 minute. So if we have these little pauses, please know that what's happened is the timer is going, the slide will change. There's probably a way to monkey with that, and I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, this painting is one of 3 in this series of the Langston Hughes paintings. It's from a book, if you ever want to pick it up, called Ask Your Mama, 12 Moods for Jazz.
Thank you. Danielle.
Hi. So I am an artist that is dealing on multiple levels. I deal with abstraction, I deal with realism, I deal with the environment, I deal with social history and geography. So sort of wrapping all those things together. I'm primarily a painter, but I have these 2 photographs in the exhibition, Common Ground, and they are both from Antarctica. And they represent what's happening in the world in terms of climate change, but they also, the one on the right, represents a kind of isolation and kind of how I feel when I feel overwhelmed by some of the environmental news that I hear, or some of the social political news that I hear. We can all feel like just a little bit of ice floating in a giant ocean, right? So those two are from Antarctica. This is a painting of mine from the Arctic. This is from the northernmost settlement in the world called New Ailsund. And it's all part of a very big collaborative project that I have been working on for 20 years, where I have sailed and painted every ocean on the planet. So when I am representing these oceans and other marginal bodies of water, I am painting their portrait. I'm painting their mood. I'm painting how I feel in that space. And what often happens is and this is sometimes subconscious, is I pick up some of the personality of the place, some of the culture of the place. So for example, my paintings of Indonesia have a completely different color palette and a different feel than my paintings from the Arctic. This is a reflection, believe it or not, quite faithful to what was there in real life in the Arctic. This is also the Arctic, and this is more about how I was feeling at the time. So I've taken the water and I've turned it around. I've moved it. I pay homage to the physics. So I take a lot of sketches, or make a lot of sketches. I take photographs, I move things around, but I try to always pay homage to what the water is like. So some of the physics that the water actually does. So in that way, I use some photography as well. This is a 5 foot by 6 foot oil on linen painting, which is what most of my paintings are, is oil on linen paintings. So I have completed all of the oceans now, and then next I'm going to continue working about letting people know, continuing to remind people about climate change, which is not going away anytime soon, with dealing with some of the problems of water. So while these may look very pretty, there's actually a very serious message behind them.
Thank you, Danielle. Eloisa.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And also thank you to Suvan and Sandra for organizing this. And also I want to further acknowledge the Kumeyaay people. I'm in San Diego, so this is their ancestral land. I wanted to do that. So I want to focus on the canoe form, which is one of the forms that I deal with. And the canoe form arose from a deliberate strategy that I started in grad school, which I wanted to answer two fundamental concerns that I had while I was in grad school and in New Mexico. So the first one is, how does art form community and relationships in an ethical and environmental and responsible way? And what is art's role in society? So those two fundamental questions. So addressing the first concern, I wanted the emphasis to be on ethics and the environment at the same time, because at the time and also now, I was looking at Western art history and material culture, and there where art function as an affirmation of political, of social power and status. And that is true today in terms of if we look at the art market, where art functions as a house or corporate jewelry or investment. And this is highlighted if you look at Louise Lawler's work, for example. And then, which also brings me to my second concern, which is context. So at the time I moved from the big island of Hawaii, where I was living for 4 years, where I was completely immersed in the Hawaiian culture and the culture of hula. It's a tradition where art, life, and a respect of the natural world are synonymous and they're not separated. And that's what I was interested in, like this Bauhaus idea of art and life without that separateness. And I was also introduced to the Hawaiian secessionist movement, which I was part of. And so from Hawaii, I went to the arid lands of New Mexico. And I wanted there to get to know my local community and also that rich cultural heritage of the Pueblo cultures and the Dene cultures. And I know that Western ethnographers, archaeologists, and anthropologists have exploited the Pueblo and Dene people by stealing or extracting their spiritual and cultural materials, and I didn't want to do that. So knowing this, I designed what became a 2-year project. So while I was in grad school there, it was a 2-year project of cross-cultural exchange. I wanted to bring the oceanic Polynesian culture to the arid lands of New Mexico. So with the permission and blessing of my kumu hula from Hawaii, every week I traveled to different community centers, especially Isleta Pueblo, shout out to them, for cross-cultural exchange where I introduced them to hula, which was super fun. And we built 3 canoes together. And I will stop there and you guys can ask more questions. It just goes on. Go ahead, Mary.
Thank you, Eloisa. Appreciate that. Maryrose.
Hi everyone. Thank you so much. It's kind of neat to follow Eloisa with my piece here that I'm showing at Common Ground. This piece is an older work, I think 2012, and it addresses actually issues of globalization and in a general sense. Personally, it deals with ideas of identity and kind of trying to reach out towards identities that are actually more less daunted by oh, sorry, I'm kind of nervous. Well, I can kind of move on. I guess I would just like to say that what I'm working with is I'm trying to exalt the banal with the materials and the imagery that I use. I tend to use very common materials that they function to me as a language. These materials have memory, they have associations to many things. In particular, with this piece, it has references to boxes, but it also has references to commerce. And being Filipino American, it has references to the Balikbayan. The aloha shirts that you saw previously, for me, those had associations to basically embracing a culture that has been embraced, whereas there's a lot of problematic issues in my own cultural background. And that I think has to do with a lot of issues revolving around imperialism and colonialism. There's a lack of understanding and acknowledgement to a lot of history that Filipinos have experienced, and there's just been a recent reemergence of that history. This piece study is actually a reduced scale chalkboard. I like to play with scale in my work, and this is a 2 foot by 4 foot instead of a doubled the size to be a standard chalkboard. And when I call it study, it is a lot of my work is about like exploring the decolonization and also the colonized mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Maryrose. Sinan.
Oh, hello, everyone. I am really happy to be here, and I have prepared a statement in case I go off track. So bear with me. Often I do get sidetracked, but I began my arts career in the performing arts, and these photographic works were influenced by Cindy Sherman's portraits. So the doppelganger series are self-portraits to illustrate my point that we are all connected. And I put myself in the scenes as both victim and perpetrator to show that we have a choice. In the top picture, Border Patrol, I depict a refugee or asylum seeker. In world news, I'm in the third world country that's been destroyed. In LA shooting, Latasha Harlins, a Black teenager, was shot, which is still very relevant nowadays because of Black Lives Matter. 15 years later, I created this photograph in 2006. And it's amazing that so little has changed. But I really wanted to show the chaos and the horrors of the riots, LA riots, and the racism that still exists in this country. In the next slide, homeless and hungry. I am both a homeless woman and a working woman, trying hard to ignore the reality of homelessness, which is now a huge problem, aggravated by the unemployment due to COVID-19. I know that you'll see a funny image of a public phone, but that was shot downtown, and most of these photographs were shot in LA and environs. They're called doppelgangers because these are my doppelgangers. I'm doubly angry. It's a collective anger, resentment, a protest at what I see as injustices and painful things which we all see in the media that affect us, that hurt our psyches. So as an artist, I express myself that way by putting myself in the picture. And I think we're all enraged by the things that are happening in our world. And they reflect our experiences psychologically and emotionally. And that's what we artists do. So thank you.
Thank you, Sinan.
Thank you.
This is my piece, Stitch in Time project. My work in general is about time and things that are on the edge of disappearing. I think disappearance tells us something about our desires for life. And we translate those desires into things and into stories and histories and monuments and under other kinds of reminders that tell us that nothing really does last forever. Over time, I have come to investigate memory and lived experience because nothing could be more ephemeral than our thoughts and feelings day to day. In this exhibit, Stitch in Time, it's a crazy quilt project and an installation made from the contributions of 24 women artists and community members. They were willing to take up a sewing needle in response to what's been happening in 2020. We began in March, whoops, okay. And I'm still looking for people who want to be part of it because it's going to go till December. So if you want to be part of it, please get a hold of me through Embed. Unmaking Wonderland was an installation about loss of memory. It occupied a basement in an underground space that was like memory because it lies below ground or below the surface. I looked at forgetting and the piecemeal way we recall the childhood story of Alice in Wonderland. That was the core metaphor. The floor of the space was a hand-painted chalk blue rabbit that was eroded and walked off by the viewer over time. On one wall was an unwinding clock made of ear candles. One was lit to burn each day of the exhibit. In another corner, there was a storybook on the ground. Its words and pictures were lightly washed out, and its pages flipped back and forth as if turned by an invisible hand, searching for something. A video projection on the turning pages made parts of the Alice's stories about things appearing and disappearing look like they were written on water or being smeared and wiped away. Okay. So that's our panel presentation. And I just wanted to give you, as a closing, this is the view you see when you look into the gallery from into the gallery at the toolbox space. And I want you to see that we've got Eloisa's piece, we've got Danelle's piece, we've got Sharon's piece, and we've got a piece of Maryrose, all in one shot. So I just had to share that with you because it's glorious. It makes me really happy. And I wanted to remind you about Embed because I think all artists should know about it. This is an amazing space. It's part of the 111 or 1111 Creative Collective. And that's a nonprofit art organization, and it's housed in Toolbox. It's a shared tech incubator and a community space. Member artists can have space for studio, space for workshops, space for classes, space to do presentations that are all beautifully appointed, by the way, as well as access to like a metal shop, a woodworking shop, a machine shop, 3D printer services. I mean, as an artist, I was like floored to know that something like that could exist. So I'm sharing all of that with you right now. But now we're getting to the meat of the panel. And that is our discussion. Now, there are 4 questions. Whether we'll get through them all or not, I can't tell you. And like I say, if you're listening and something that's said raises a question, please put it in the chat box. We'll get to it at the end. So the first question, and this goes to everybody, because I don't know who will want to say what when. So if you want to respond at any point to anything that I've said, other people have said, please raise your hand and I'll call on you so that you can do that. But we should all be pretty much unmuted unless you think you're going to have a dog bark through your thing. Okay? The first question is, what do you see as the state of the world right now? Who'd like to answer that? Okay, Sinan.
All right, we are in a state of emergency. It's crisis time. The world is in a state of not one crisis, but multiple crises. On the one hand, we have a globalism, sharing goods, sharing commerce and thoughts and beliefs. It's expanded and we cooperate. But at the same time, there's been an incredible rise of nationalism, isolationism, and exclusionary tactics. And you know, the US, which is the wealthiest superpower in the world, has now adopted an attitude that's turned its back on its allies. So we've got this sharp relief in politics. But not only that, we've got the climate crisis and of course, the COVID pandemic. So we're, you know, the new norm is crazy.
It's the new norm. Okay. Does anybody want to add to that or send it in a different direction? Eloisa.
Yeah, so just to piggyback off of Sinan, but before I go on, I just want to acknowledge Sharon's reading list, which is the same as mine. I love Octavia Butler. Not enough people read her. Anyway, and Toni Morrison. So so just to piggyback off of Sinan's, I think the speed and abundance of information create a tsunami of misinformation right now. And the challenge for us is to create a culture where every human has the media literacy to sift truth from fiction. And I think that goes with climate change. Like, we need to know what the truth is about climate change and the facts surrounding it. And so I think this media literacy can come from institutions like public schools and churches. And I think that's why we're artists, because we work within the realm of culture, and that's where humans can affect change, right? So that's where we could have correct information about our climate crisis, our political crisis, about COVID.
Sharon.
I just want to add to all of those perspectives that I recognize this being an unusual confluence of emergencies. But I also when when I talk to some of the people who are younger than me, I remind them that my entire life I've seen emergency, and my forefathers' lives were in emergency, and that it has gone back hundreds of years of emergency, and change has been not as quickly as we would like, because here I am repeating the same activism that when I was 18. So this time, we have to look at it in a totality, that human beings experience, combinations of factors that seem to hem in on us all at once, like now, but that we do have to remain vigilant and active to confront change always, because change is a constant. It's always there, and it always has to be met with intelligent beings, the species that we claim to be, looking for those solutions.
I like what Sharon was saying there about confronting change. So change is something that we don't always have a lot of control over. And I think that with the sort of how quickly things have changed in the last 20, 30 years with technology, we've gotten used to this idea of things changing, and we just go along with it. So the idea of confronting change is something that honestly had never really occurred to me, to confront change. I like that idea, and I'm going to think about that idea more. I've always thought of, well, how do I bend change, right? Like, so no pun intended with climate change, that is something that we need to confront, right? That's not the good kind of change. That's the bad kind of change. So I like that idea. Thank you for that.
And also I like your point about how, in terms of change in the face of how people inherit struggles, right? It's a movement. So you just keep inheriting it, and then you move it forward. There might be some steps back, but then if you take that mantle and you keep going, that we know that other people have struggled in the past, and so we have to acknowledge that and then go with it and keep pushing in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
Maryrose, you wanted to ask
about, sorry. I just wanted to make a point about Eloisa's information, that it's all well and good for us to want to have true facts and not fake news, but there are a lot of people in the world who do not have access to Wi-Fi or correct information. They have a kind of propaganda, or living in destitution or third world places where they don't have access to any information. So that was just a point.
We have a lot of propaganda here too.
Yeah, we have.
Maryrose?
I think that what I'm seeing is that we have been really fortunate here in the United States, and that this pandemic and this collision of all of these issues, particularly I think the pandemic, has made us kind of see what others have been experiencing all their lives, and that it's actually really more real for us now, instead of something that we could just tune out and ignore.
I agree. And to go to Eloisa's point about how much media has brought us, I mean, when we see the conditions of police violence, when we see what's happening in other countries, whether it be war or people moving en masse to get out of an area because of famine or whatever it is, it hits us differently. It's like, when the Vietnam War, when they showed all the coffins coming off the planes, people were like, shit, there's a lot of people dying, you know, whereas if it's just a number on a piece of paper, numbers are easy. Coffins, yeah, not so much. So there's something about, and we're visual people. I am, and that's how I look at things, how I absorb information. First thing I look at first thing I look at is funny pieces. But when I look at the newspaper, the first thing I look at is the photograph, and then I read the caption, and then I read the article. And why? Because I'm visual, that's how the information comes in. But I don't think we're alone. I think that words they do carry a lot of information, but boy, images carry so much. We're really, in a sense, structuring the dialogue, or can be, adding to the dialogue the culture is having. Okay, anybody else have a comment they want to add? All right, let's go on to the second question. What did you learn about yourself, about nature, or the human world during the early quarantine isolation? Who'd like to answer that?
All right, nobody wants to answer, so I'll answer. Absolutely nothing.
Oh, really? Wow.
No, I wouldn't say that I learned a heck of a lot about myself. I really enjoy my own company, and I really enjoy the company of the family that I live with, my family. And I have been enjoying having them home. That's a very selfish thing because we're healthy, right? Had we not been healthy, it would be a very different scenario. And I do have family members that have survived COVID-19, thankfully. So I would say less maybe about myself. I definitely have gone into myself more. I've created more of a shell maybe around myself. I have not been very active on social media at all. But in terms of, I have been surprised about this American culture, that there was such a reaction to wearing masks. I have found that quite shocking, because although you can't mandate that people wear masks, you also can't mandate that somebody doesn't shut the door in your face when you're walking into the post office, right? But it's just rude. You don't do it. It's wrong. You wouldn't, speed up when a little old lady is walking across the street. That probably is illegal. But anyway, there are things that in society, hopefully that's illegal, but there are things in society that you can't mandate. But why would you be such a jerk, frankly, and not protect other people to make some kind of a statement?
Okay. Sharon.
Well, when the COVID lockdown was imminent, I was on my way to Spain. I had tickets, and my daughter and I were going to go to Spain to visit my son. I have 2 grown children. My son is a musician who's living in Madrid right now. And of course, our flight got canceled 2 days before we were thinking about maybe still trying to go. And I found something interesting happened. My first instinct was to make sure that my children were okay, which is natural for any mother. And I was terrified about my son being in Madrid. I kept saying, no, come home, come home. Healthcare is going to be better here. It's going to be more stable here. And he kept saying, Mom, I think I should stay here and just not fly. They have healthcare. And I was just, no, come home to America, right? And boy, was I wrong. So I found out that this vision that we have of America can be so wrong. I know it's wrong in a lot of ways, but I didn't anticipate the crisis of COVID being addressed the way that it is, and so many system failures that occurred where my son was safer in Madrid than if he had come home.
Mm.
That was a shocking realization to me.
I think what was shocking to me was just how quickly nature cleared the air, cleared the water. Suddenly I was seeing wildlife. I've lived here for 30 years, and suddenly I was seeing roadrunners, bobcat on my driveway. You know, suddenly I was seeing wild animals again. And I was like, where have they been? You know, yeah, I would see coyotes occasionally, but now, you know, this is obviously what coyotes are living off of. But you'd see pictures from around the world of things coming out, you know, and they showed the canals in Venice, and suddenly you could see down into them. It wasn't just black water. So, and air so clear, you know, and quiet. Oh my God, did you hear the birds? You know, and they were everywhere. It was just like, whoa. I notice now that every morning what I hear is the freeways. And so I noticed how nature responded so quickly, just because we stopped doing just for a while. That was pretty impressive.
You know, that's interesting because I remember seeing on the news that dolphins started coming into the Venice canals. It was like the animals were saying, where'd they go? What is going? Something's happening. Well, where are the humans? You know, they recognized that something had happened to us, that something had shifted and that we weren't acting normally. Of course, I don't know dolphin speak to ask them if they were looking for anyone in particular, but it was.
That or they always wanted to go to Venice.
Right.
I think they're always there, actually, anyway. You know.
And also American rivers, the dolphins were going in.
Oh, were they? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, can I add something about my experience from COVID when it first began? And I'd just like to say that I'm a fairly confident person, and I feel comfortable in my environment. And you know, I grew up in Australia, and I've always felt very safe. But when COVID first hit and we were all isolated, I found out that my cousins had experienced some racial prejudice, and some old guy had coughed on them, because they were wearing masks, and I felt very shocked by that. And I felt a little afraid myself. I thought, is it safe for me to walk around? Is it safe? Will I be attacked or coughed on? Which I've never had that feeling before. So that was a little bit of a strange way that affected my behavior. And I had to wear a mask or hide behind a hat or try and disguise myself somehow. You know. But that was the only thing that was, you know, it made me aware of the increase in racial prejudice, which I didn't personally experience, but I know that my relatives have. So that was a change. But,
We are certainly living in a time when humanity is responding to crisis in ways that is alarming, and not necessarily what you'd expect from people who are thinking. So I too found, well, just the response to when I saw Black Lives Matter, and I saw so many people going out to demonstrate in the streets, some wearing masks, some not, you know. But I thought to myself, wow, this is amazing, because on my, you know, I'm going, oh my God, right now that's like really dangerous. Not because of the police, that's a whole other thing. But because of, the person standing next to you could sneeze on you. It's like, oh my God. So you have to be fully committed to really want to do that. Not just I want to go out and get a hamburger, but really I want to go out and put myself in close, proximity to people who could make me sick. This could kill me. And people did it, not just a few, all over the country. I was really impressed by that.
Yeah, my daughter was protesting a lot. And so I would have to call her at the end of the day or at the end and just say, let me know when you're home, to make sure that she was safe and that she was going to survive that day. But
Danielle, did you?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and we had a lot of conversations in our family about should we protest? We wanted to protest. Should we protest? Just because of having a large group of people together. So we decided that it was the best idea, and not just for what it stands for and for standing up for what's right, but also to teach our daughter. We have an 11-year-old daughter, and we all three protested together, and we made signs, and we have protested, and it was great. It was such a feeling of camaraderie. Everyone's together. It was somber. It wasn't like, hey, let's go have a party, but it was like you're really doing something good. And to be able to share that with our daughter and have her really get a sense of what's right and the kind of risks like you're talking about, Suvan. Okay, we talked about the risks. We don't really want to go in a crowd, but it's worth it. This is something where if we take enough precautions and we choose protests, which aren't maybe the 20,000, 50,000 people ones, but the sort of 10,000 people ones, then maybe that, will teach her something and do something, great, hopefully, for our community.
Cool.
I just want to add that the interesting thing that we should think about COVID is that it doesn't care what race you are. It doesn't care what your economic status is. It doesn't care where your nation is, that it has, if not anything, taught us that we are all human and all vulnerable and all fragile. And maybe something in understanding that led people to realize that they are connected to the man whose knee was put on his neck, that we're all connected. And I think the protests, as well as COVID, speak to our connectivity.
You mean our common ground?
Our common ground. Yeah.
All connected, yeah.
Yeah. It's there whether we want to recognize it or not.
yeah.
Yeah, I think what the pandemic highlights is the earth doesn't need us as humans. Like what Suvan was saying, you can hear birds singing and you can see nature like taking over the natural world. But since we're here as humans, what are those common grounds? How do we connect? How do we connect to nature? How do we connect to each other? And how do we address these inequities, right? And all the misinformation about climate change. And that's our role as artists, is in that realm of culture to really change the cultural terrain, right, as artists, because yeah, it's obvious that the universe will go on without us, but since we're here, we have to act.
And just one last thing, the art world. I was really surprised because in March I thought, well, that's the end of the art world for a good long time. Nothing's gonna happen, just forget about it. And totally the opposite thing happened. Artists, I participated in drive-by art during COVID. artists were still making art. People were making murals. Zoom came into being with artist talks. People were determined to forge through this extremely challenging time. And it just, you know, I was really impressed with artists and how they kept moving forward in spite of this huge challenge.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of, which kind of goes to one of our other questions, but whether we'll get there or not. So I'll just say, you know, I've seen a lot of artists responding to the pandemic and the confinement that we have in creative ways, you know, whether it be, they notice a lot of people are walking on the streets, so they're hanging their art along the fence so that people can, and they change it. Musicians are sitting outside their house playing music, you know, so people can sit around, you know, on the street with glasses of wine. And poetry reading, same thing, you know, somebody sets up a microphone on their front porch and they're just basically reading their poetry or somebody else's poetry. You know, what we're doing is about, and I think we forget that we forget that we are basically responsible for creating the community literally around us, you know, in our immediate sphere. We've got such a global reach now that we forget that it's our immediate neighbors who are our immediate community, that if we reach out to them with our creativity, could perhaps be, you know, forging something solid that, you know, with a real exchange possible. It feels so difficult to have an exchange right now.
And how organic some things happened, like people playing music from rooftops or singing from balconies or coming together to clap their hands. I still sometimes think of the sound of clapping hands to honor the first line workers. How organic and what beautiful things we can do as a human species in times of crisis. And you know, we need to really hone in on that quality that we have to bring beauty and resilience through these times.
So let's go on to the next question, which I'll just sort of paraphrase and put it another way, is there's a lot of things going on. I think we've talked about a lot of them. And has anything that's gone on, is it affecting the way you're currently making your art, how you think you might make it? I mean, Danelle, you were talking about, you know, you had a different orientation after Sharon. Is it affecting the way you make art, or maybe the way you're going to reach for your audience, or that you're forced to reach for it? Or because this could go on for a while. I mean, even if they get a vaccine, you know, I don't know about you, but I'm 72 and I'm not like crazy to go, oh yeah, like give me that and I'm running out into the world. So anybody want to talk to that? Maryrose, you haven't said a thing.
No, I have.
Well, not recently. Come on.
All right, I'm making smaller works.
How are you?
Smaller works because they don't take up too much space, and that just like collages, and rather than big works.
Okay, because why? You're warehousing them? Why?
Oh, because I can throw them away more quickly. I just feel like it's not like it's going to be exhibited. It's an attitude of being shrinking, I guess, having more control and not stacking up works that we used to exhibit in galleries. So I feel like we're just putting it out on Facebook or Instagram or online, and it doesn't matter about the size so much in terms of finish or framing or, you know, that sort of thing.
I do understand, especially that ephemerality and what that feels like. There's something about making something that you know will be spread on social media, but you may never see hung on a wall. It's like, okay, it's there and then it's gone. And to embrace that, to actually say, yeah, I recognize that changes the way you feel about, it must be important because it has to be said, but then it's gone because nobody can hear it anymore. The image is there. Although on the internet, things keep popping back up forever.
But that happens, that's always happened for you, Suvan, right? Because you make installations, and when you have an installation in one museum or gallery, it's going to look really different in the next one, or maybe it will have literally burned itself out, right? Or disappeared in some way, or you have to get a different sand or what have you.
Well, making installation was a choice for me. I really, because I like ephemerality. I was also less aware of it when I began, but now that I'm older, I realize that when I'm gone, nobody's going to be remaking these things. And it's like saying, oh, wow, that really was like writing my name in the sand. Wow, that's interesting. Which, it's just interesting. It's not good or bad. It's just interesting because, eventually in 3,000 years, kids, none of us are going to be here. So just kind of looking at that and turning it into your life's work is like, oh, well, such is life. But that's just one piece of it. I mean, this time has also taught us about what happens when we're isolated, when we're alone. Has that affected, the way you're making art? Do you feel that you're making it for a different audience because less people will see it because there's less shows? I don't know if there will be less shows. The art market seems to be pretty resilient too. Maryrose.
Hey, I can chime in here. I kind of really am happy about the pause. I really like working slowly, and I am happy to be able to delve into the ideas and the books that I want to read and just research and just take time with work. So I see it as an opportunity, actually. I mean, I think, all of us are really busy, and for a little while, I was really busy, and it was a little bit overwhelming. And this kind of addresses that first experience too, when we first had to lock down. I thought that pause was a really important time for everybody. It did, it gave us a time to breathe a little bit, and the world too, right? And so I just think of this as like, time to just like ruminate on what you want to do and think about it, and when this is over, or if it ever is over, we'll all have something because we've been working through it or thinking about it. So I really actually like Danielle. I am kind of I'm comfortable with my space, and so I find that maybe we all needed a little bit of that. There's so much noise, and so much visual noise, so much internet noise, and so I'm appreciating it, actually.
Danielle?
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm appreciating what you said, Maryrose, and also Suvan. I can hear the birds more. I'm more surprised when I hear a car or a truck drive on my street. I'm actually from the country, so it used to be where I grew up, if someone drove down the street, you would go to somebody else in your family and you'd say, hey, did you hear somebody just drove by? Which seems funny now, but we actually did do that. I like that. I like having things take a pause. However, I am so much more angry now. I'm angry about the way that Black people in this country and in other countries have been treated for so long, as well as all races too, right? I don't want to neglect racism elsewhere. I'm super angry about the populism I'm super angry about some of the things that the government of this country has or has not done. And I'm super angry, might sound funny, I'm super angry that people are not talking about climate change as much as they should be, right? People were talking about climate change a lot. And it was like, finally, it was like birthing this 50-year-old baby or whatever, this I don't know, pregnancy that lasted for 50 years, right? It's like, finally, we're talking about it. We're gonna do something. It's fantastic. We're all working together. And then nothing, just completely eclipsed by all this other news. So on the one hand, I'm happy to be making work and so forth, but on the other hand, I'm super angry about that.
Yeah, because COVID is climate change. That's why we're in COVID, because we are destroying wildlife homes. That's why we have COVID, because humans have gone into these wild places. That's why we have COVID. So when this new administration comes in, that's when, climate change and COVID has to be talked about, and healthcare, that is totally what we're doing. I think that's super, super important to just really educate people about why we have COVID and how it is tied to climate change.
We've had in the past 9 years 4 different pandemics. I don't know if you remember SARS and MERS and Ebola. Those were all same thing, wild animal, that we had never been in contact with as human beings. Something got transferred for them to the human, could adapt, and it got global. Now, they were dealt with. They are being dealt with. This one, there was too much denial. But to Danelle, I wanted, I get angry too. Does that change the way you do art? Does that affect the kind of art? You've done some incredible projects, literally going around the world to visit where glaciers are melting, where seas are rising, where things are happening, to document what's happening. And that's climate change. But what about this other thing, what deforestation does, what desertification does? Because all of that is affecting people's lives. Does that kind of thing, is that something that you go, God, as soon as I get out of here, I'm hitting the road, gonna get on another boat, or just wondering?
Well, I think you've asked such a good question. All of these things are fueling an emotion in me, not just anger, but that's one that comes to mind at the moment. I'm not a super emotional person. I think that's my own assessment. Ask my husband, he might say something different. In terms of my artwork, I think that I'm much more of a slow burn. So these ideas come in and I ruminate about them for a long, long time before I start making artwork. So I don't know, maybe my next series of artwork will be super angry, or maybe it'll be more abstract or have a different color palette. I don't foresee, though, to your question, I don't foresee there being any future where I go, oh, well, that's taken care of. Climate change, all dealt with. Tick, I don't think that's going to ever happen.
Okay, Sharon, I thought, yeah.
Yeah, I think because all of us have worked in some aspect of either social justice or climate change or some issue of concern. I think our practices are already addressing a lot of those issues. I just think for me, I know that I did a couple pieces of work responsive to the current Black Lives Matter movement that maybe I wouldn't have ordinarily made. But it's still in the same vein of what my practice is always about anyway. And I think that's probably true with most of us. We're concerned with not just making things pretty. There's nothing wrong with pretty art. But you know, if you're making a landscape, Danielle, or something, it's not just pretty. It's about something of serious concern. And I think that all of us, you know, we all want to bring beauty into the world, but we're also thinking through a lot of issues. And I think it's not really changing our art. Maybe it's just giving us more material to work from, which
Beauty is very seductive. And if you want to say something really hard for people to hear, it's to be able to say it beautifully so that at least you get their attention that way. Can, you know, spoonful of sugar, I don't know what it is, but that makes the medicine go down, right? And I do keep thinking about what this Chinese artist, who unfortunately I don't remember his name, said something about we're immersed in our cultures, and whatever we put out will always carry with it everything that we've taken in. Whether we mean it to or not, it will. And, but that doesn't mean, for myself, I think about, I mean, the earth is going to carry on. We may not be here, but the earth is going to carry on. And I keep thinking about the art that, and this kind of goes to the last question that I had, which was the art that I look at now that just really impresses me is the art that people are figuring out, how do I talk to people? What is it I need to say? And it always comes out of that place inside of us that we can't help, you know, we can't help. This is how I see the world. And I just wondered if there was a place in you that you sense that there's something brewing, I guess, you know? And even if you can't put your finger on it and say, yeah, and that's where it's going to go, that you can feel that place inside you and go, yeah, I know something's going to come out. After my mother died, I was like, I'm not going to do a piece about that. It took me 3 years, and finally it was a thread that ran through something. I didn't even know I was putting it in there.
Suvan, we're
Yeah.
right about the time we would start our questions, and I'm wondering if we could maybe take a couple and then maybe return to let this imbibe hold for the panelists, so we can hear from. There's some really good, a couple really good questions that I think relates well to where we are right now in this about the art making.
Sure.
All right.
You can read them.
Alrighty, so I'm going to start with the first one that came, and with apologies if I'm not pronouncing the name right. It's from Karen Foyer-Schreiger. I've been appreciating the collective art projects that I have joined. Do you feel that the art world has moved closer to collective projects? Less ego and individualism involved, more sharing? How do you feel about, well, let's start with that. There's also a question about lack of audience, but let's just start with collective art projects. I think that's a really, and less ego in where we are. Would love to hear from others on that.
Would you repeat it again? Do you what?
Sure. Do you feel that the art world has moved closer in the making has moved closer to doing collective projects? Perhaps less ego and individualism is involved and more sharing. And there's a related question. I don't know if you want to go with this or not, but it says, how do you feel about lack of audience and not seeing or experiencing what viewers are experiencing? But let's start with the collective, because we have a couple of those works in the show. I know some of you have participated in collective projects. You can take it whatever angle you want, but I just thought that was a really interesting topic to bring forward.
Thank you. Let me see a show of hands. Anybody want to take on that question?
I think you should, Suvan, because you've got the big collective piece in the show.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll take a swing at it. I don't know that the world has moved closer to collective projects. For me, it was one way of knowing I wasn't alone, and getting sort of a feel for what other people were feeling at the same time, because I knew what I was feeling, and I just wondered if I was kind of alone in that. And so mine came out of curiosity. And as for ego, I got to say, when you're working with a collective, Kim Abeles could speak to this, your ego is there, but it is always stepping from side to side because there's so many other things that need to be dealt with. People's perspectives shift, their needs for what they're doing, why they're doing it, etc. And you want to honor your collaborators. You want to be sensitive to what they've got to deal with, what you've given them to deal with, what they're going to give you, and all of that. It's a complicated process that I think some of us, I mean, some of you are mothers, you know, and you've done work with your kids, and you've done work with classes maybe that you've led. And don't you find that shifts? I mean, you may have I'm going to do this with this group. And then the group does something and you go, yeah, you know, that's a whole bunch more interesting right over there. I mean, all right, Danielle.
I know that I've done more, I've participated in more of the Swika collective calls for like the what is it called now, the book, postcards, and the other art with the quilt. Those collective things have been very helpful because you feel more connected to a community of artists, and I found that very supportive. So it's different from, you know, the so-called fine art world, you know, or the world of sales.
Yeah, it is.
You know,
Danielle.
Yeah, I find that I've been going from the micro to the macro. I can't separate myself as a person from being an artist because, you know, we're all so like this. But where we live, as with many of the participants and viewers today, there have been forest fires for several years now. There have been a lot of forest fires. Our backyard burned. 7 houses on our street burned. I tell my friends, you know, it's going to be a bad day when the governor of California shows up in front of your house, right? That's never good. But what did come out of that, the micro, is that instantly, because we had only been in the house for a few months, instantly I got all of the cell phone numbers of all of my neighbors, and we all connected immediately and have stayed connected. And then with the pandemic, we have been buying groceries for our neighbors. Those neighbors who don't feel comfortable going to the grocery store. I have some neighbors that haven't been to the grocery store once. And then with the art world, I wouldn't say that I've been part of more collaborative projects yet, but I've been able to help out. I'm not help out. I've been able to actually visit more exhibitions this way, because I can go to exhibitions in London, I can go to exhibitions in Paris, I can go to exhibitions in Los Angeles, and that's super exciting.
Mm-hmm. Eloisa.
Yeah, well, I was going to say the art market is not a collective. I think that's different. I mean, I think the art world is divided into different, you know, groups and subgroups, and the art market is definitely not collective. And most of the collaborative and collective works that I know of come from university art educators, because it's easier for them to do that, like to go to CAA and go into groups and, you know, and panels like that. But as an artist, that's something that I really seek out. And in terms of ego, because I like my ego to be quashed, and I like things to feel unsteady because I know that I'm not this crazy person that knows everything. And so, like, for example, one of my pieces that I did or that I'm still working on is a documentary on my dad in the Philippines. And there, my cousins just overtook my project. And it was really nice to just step back and have really strong opinions, you know, about my work, or going to the pueblos and having the kids say, you know, maybe this is better or that's better. So for like young artists or even older artists, I would encourage to go into that collective, collaborative zone. It's a nice, unsteady place of learning. So yeah, so that's what I have to say about that.
Cool.
I started teaching a little bit more collaboratively, actually. So because my students were all at home, I created this project where they would create a coloring book together because I was inspired by other groups that were doing that. And they did a really great job. They all felt a similar connection to dealing with this new platform. And then it inspired me to do that with some of my favorite drawers. So I'm working on that right now. And I think that it's a nice way to say that we are dealing with something right now that is affecting all of us in a similar and also unique way. So I really like this aspect of just doing something really simple, something that just kind of can be engaging. It's an adult coloring book, but but it's still in a I guess a genre that's lighthearted, and you know, if you know what I like to do in my own work, I know Suvan knows, is that I feel like I'm a little bit of a comedian that has this dark side, but then it comes out in a humorous way.
That's great. I really appreciate you all taking a stab at that. I think it rings true and dear to my heart, having done collective projects. There's actually one behind me that's the community mandala. And what I've learned, and I learned it from working with Kim Ableys, is you basically give people parameters and materials that if you're going to exhibit them that you'd like to share, that are willing, you know, that sort of meet that, and then you invite them to create and keep it fairly simple. It works really well. And so I think that part is, to me, there's an element, it's sort of it's a nourishing sort of oxytocin that comes forward when we're creating together. And those of you who recognize my email, it is called Be Artrageous for a reason. So anyway, that's, that was not my question, but Suvan, in our preparing for this, invited me to contribute here or there where it was relevant. There's another really, really wonderful question that draws on a topic that, you know, I'd encourage people to put other questions into the chat or responses. And this one is from Danielle's friend, I believe, that's joining us, Helen. She's from England, right? So she's our person willing to stay up late with us. And she's asked, she really liked the fact that artists like yourselves are finding so many ways to reach people through their work during the pandemic, and how they share it as covered earlier in this conversation. And then her question: what else, if anything, gives you hope for succeeding to make changes and also to make a compelling ask of others, drawing on strengths within the artistic communities to inspire, inform, and challenge the rest of the world? In other words, how can this experience you're having as artists in the community help to inspire the rest of the world to make change? What gives you hope that that is a possibility?
I think it's kind of like we have to, right?
Right?
Isn't necessity the mother of invention, and other hackneyed expressions like that, right? I mean, we have to get people fired up. I think that as artists, that's part of our job. And one of the great things about, that's a terrible expression, but one of the more positive things that's come out of the pandemic is the use of, social video software like the one that we're using right now, which is enabling us to collaborate. We've been on panels where our panelists are coming from all over the world, and we're able to collaborate. We could have done that before. The software did exist, but we weren't so inspired as we are now, because now everybody is literate in this software and everybody is literate in the experience of doing it. So I think from now on, we're going to see a lot more collaboration that way. And then there's the necessity. I'm thinking of climate change, of course. There's the necessity. We have to get things fixed. There's Black Lives Matter. We have to get that fixed, or we're not going to be able to continue as a society.
I think we have an urgency to continue. We have a responsibility because I am on edge. We're all on edge. We have a responsibility for the children because they're losing out on so much. And we have that need to hold that torch for them and not for us, because we don't want them to be despairing. We don't want them to miss out. We have to create this for them. We have to stand on the road and we have to stand our ground. It's for the future, for the children, because there's so much more at stake for them. The domestic violence, the locked in, the lack of social connection, and we cannot collapse as artists, as older artists. I think that's what I think, we have to do it for them.
Yeah, I'm very inspired by my students, the Generation Z and also millennials, how vocal they are. And I really am 100% supporting them in being loud, about their concerns and acting on it. And I throw people at them like Betty Saar or Octavia Butler, and all of the past struggles that have come before them, that this is something that they've inherited. And I'm so glad that they're taking it and they're going with it. And I completely and utterly support that, their generation.
Yeah, and I just want to add that it's easy for people to become cynics, and for a certain amount of lethargy to sit in, and that happens. And I think we have to combat that to keep the hope present, because it's easy to say we've been trying to fix this change for so long, what's the use? And so we have to fight against that lethargy and against cynicism in our society, in our world, and keep that hope present, that you just have to keep in on. keep keeping on.
Keep keeping on. Yeah, I like Obama's directive to his to his volunteers, which is make conversation. It's not go into a debate, it's go in one-on-one, make a conversation with people, go into those places that you feel uncomfortable going to, and just make that very simple conversation and show them your humanity.
And to add that, I'd just like to add what we just saw a beautiful display of was passion. I mean, as artists, let's face it, they're not paying us the big bucks. We're not doing this because, we're getting glory and praise. These are our lives, and we bring to it, whether somebody's going to reward us with accolades or whatever, we bring ourselves completely. And that is the most compelling thing in any conversation that we're going to have. If we come in, Maryrose and I were having a discussion yesterday, and I was talking about activism, and this one Black performance artist was asked, you know, by his audience, what can we do? His whole performance was about everything that was possible. The audience was like, but what can I do? What can I do? And he just said, go, and I don't know the quote exactly, but something like, go into your life saying to yourself, I'm an activist. And just making that decision will change everything. It will change the way you feel that you can represent yourself. It will feel that you can say what you need to say. It gives you permission, you know, just making that one decision. You don't have to do anything else. Just say that. I am an activist for this. Will change the conversation. Will give you what you need because it's already there. We're passionate about what we do.